Locum tenens, Latin for placeholder. Find out why and why not a physician would want to be a placeholder. Welcome to the exciting world of locums. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Dr. Andrew Wilner, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here.
So to introduce to you, Dr. Andrew Wilner is a board-certified internist, neurologist, epilepsy specialist, and locum tenens expert because in 1982 he discovered locum tenens and that it was the perfect solution to achieving the work-life balance as a physician and writer, or at least the balance that he was looking for at the time. And he did that inpatient, outpatient, academic, community. He's also a prolific medical journalist and the author of several books, one of which is about locum tenens. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Currently, he's an associate professor of neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, where he cares for patients, teaches, still writes, and lives with his wife and son. Dr. Wilner, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for that kind and very succinct and accurate introduction. You got it. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. We could talk about whatever you want.
So locums, I've never done it myself. What is locum tenens?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. And everybody who does locums will tell the same story is that, you're sitting on the plane. Oh, where are you going to? It's like, well, I'm going to Minneapolis because I got a locum tenens assignment. So they go, what? Nobody knows what locum tenens is, except, the people that do it. Locums is a Latin for place, and tenens is like tenacity, something holding on. So you're a placeholder. You are like a substitute teacher coming to a clinic or a hospital to cover basically for somebody who's out maybe on maternity leave or extended vacation, or the hospital's growing and they need somebody, or they just lost somebody who went to work across the street and they got to fill that slot. And as you know, recruiting a full-time physician or partner, it could take a year, right? By the time they sign all the contracts and get credentialed by all the insurance companies. So a locums guy can jump in there and can get a temporary license, get expedited credential, and start working while they're waiting so the patients get seen and the institution or the clinic doesn't lose so much money where nothing is happening. So locum tenens, it's just like traveling nurse, right? That's been around for a long time. And, locum tenens, it got formalized maybe 30 years ago as a thing. But, doctors have been filling in and traveling, since Hippocrates used to travel around different communities and do stuff. So it's not really a new thing, but it's recently formalized.
With travel nursing, though, you don't have the job security, right? Same thing with locums, but they tend to make significantly more money. Is that the same for locums with physicians?
Probably. Well, compensation is a whole topic. In fact, I just made some slides. I would say your hourly rate is higher, but as a 1099 employee, as a temporary employee, you don't get the benefit. So depending on what your benefit package is, you might earn more actually as a full-time, depending on how you value those benefits. But yes, your cash salary per hour, for example, is usually higher because you don't get benefits. So if you want those benefits like vacation time or health insurance, you're the one. When I worked locums full-time, I was working locums full-time before I came to Regional One Health, where I am now in Memphis. I had to pay my own health insurance. I had to go find it and buy it for my wife and myself. And at that time, it was about $1,500, $2,000 a month, for a classy health insurance. And that came out of my pocket. Now, I did qualify for an HSA. That's something that you can do, and that saved a little money that way. But that's a big expense for someone who is self-employed. So as a locum tenens physician, if you work full-time, locums, you're self-employed. Now, some physicians will just do locums during their vacation time, right? They'll go up to Alaska for a few weeks during their vacation, make some extra money, come back to their W-2, their normal employed job. So you can do it either way, but I think it's growing as a full-time endeavor. I did it for over 10 years full-time because now what you point out is true. Because it's a succession of temporary assignments, there's no job security at all. In other words, you do your 6 months in Minnesota or South Dakota where I work, and you're done. So when it's the last, 2 months, you start hunting around for your next assignment. Or in my case, I used to take several months and go to Southeast Asia. I'm a scuba diver and I write and I did medical mission work. So I would do all of those things for several months until I ran out of money. And then I would come back for a new assignment. And that worked very well. And right now, there's a huge demand for locums. So the job security thing doesn't really come into play. Anybody who wants to work, now you have to be a little flexible. There may not be work, in San Francisco when you want to go to San Francisco. You might have to go to, Reno, Nevada or somewhere, maybe not quite the same. But there are many jobs in all specialties really that are available. You've heard of the doctor shortage, right? And locums is really growing because of the need. And also, it's just so cumbersome for institutions to acquire new doctors. And because of there's also a new work ethic, right? It used to be, when I was a kid and I looked up to my dad's friends who were physicians, they were established. They lived in the community, they owned their own office. They usually owned the building, and kind of leased it to themselves. They were members of the Chamber of they did all that community stuff because they were part of the community. Well, now with more than 50% of physicians being employees, all of a sudden you have mobility.
And we don't have that sense of ownership.
Right. There's no ownership. Yeah. And there's no point really investing in the community because the community isn't investing in you.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden,
look out for number one.
Pick up and go. So if you're going to pick up and go, why have a contract at all? Why not work where you want to work and travel? And the other value of locums, and it was for me, is it helps you if you're a starting out physician find your niche. In my case, I was actually looking for a niche 7 years ago. I was working locums, everything was great, but we were going to have a baby, and I wanted to settle down a little bit and not fly all over the place. So I started looking for a permanent job. I looked for 2 years, and I was able to look for 2 years because I had the security of locums. Kaiser had a great job. It wasn't perfect, so I didn't take it. Yeah. There was another great job in Portland. It wasn't perfect, so I didn't take it. So I was able to look, and then I found this job that I have now where I get to teach and take care of indigent patients, which I enjoy. And it was a good and work 7 on, 7 off, which is what I was doing in locums. And so it allowed me to kind of had space and time and experiences in my locums. I did academic locums. I didn't even know that existed, but I was sort of a fill-in professor at 2 institutions, 3 actually, before I took this permanent job. So it's a nice way to test the water.
There were 2 things that you mentioned that I want to explore. One, I just want to comment on myself. I think it's pretty awesome that you were living in a high cost of living country, working a locums position for a few months, a year, and then going to a low cost of living country and using that money to bum around and scuba dive for extended periods of time because the dollar was worth so much more. So I think that sounds like quite an adventure and just an amazing way to spend those years when you're just out of residency if you have that flexibility in your schedule, especially if it's just you that you have to look out for. So I think that sounds amazing. And I'm jealous that you did that. The other thing that I want to explore a little more is you'd mentioned that you're an employee, you're employed because, they're paying your salary, but you're not an employee. And so you are like a contractor at that point, which means you're self-employed. And we talked about this on a couple of episodes ago. For the listeners, check out the episode with Dave Deniston, where we talk about the tax advantages, because yes, you have to pay your own health insurance. However, there are a ton of tax advantages to being self-employed. So you can deduct a ton of stuff that you can't deduct when you're a W-2 employee. So that sounds like a big advantage of doing locums if that is your main source of income.
Yes. In fact, I'm speaking to you from my home office which is tax deductible because I'm self-employed as a locums physician part-time and also some other income-generating kind of adventures. And so that's a big one, is that a lot of your sort of customary expenses like a computer, stuff like that, become tax deductible because they're legitimate work expenses if you're self-employed. And what you're referring to is you can put much more money, assuming you earn it, in a 401k, in what's called a self-employed 401k, a self-directed 401k. And, that requires some tax planning. So I'll put in a plug for my channel, The Art of Medicine with Dr. Andrew Wilner, because I have 2 episodes with accountants where we talk about that. So you need a CPA to help you optimize that. But yes.
Yeah, don't try and do it your own on QuickBooks. Get a professional. Yeah.
It's not that hard. But if you're, putting a central line isn't that hard either, but you don't want to learn that from YouTube. So, get some help. But yes, some people with locums will do better. In fact, I think I did better 1 year as a locums physician than I had ever done as a full-time physician, even balancing out all the things I had to pay myself. So it is a way to earn more potentially.
Can they pull the rug out from under you? So let's say you have like a locum, like you've got this 2-month lead, like you said, 2 months before I know my locums position is ending. I'm looking for my next one. I've got it secured. I found an apartment. My flight is booked. My bags are packed. What's the lead time that they can give you before they can say, you know what? Actually, we found someone full time. We don't need you anymore.
30 days.
30 days. Okay. So that's enough time you got to make sure that you've got enough money in the bank and a cushion to have that happen to you. Yeah.
It's happened to me twice.
All
set to go. And literally on the 30-day mark, I got an email. Oh, they don't need you. No explanation, no excuses. It's like, too bad for you. So I always recommend you're going to do locums. You have to have 6 months of money in the bank so you don't stress, because it might take you a month or 2 or 3 to find, depending on how picky you are, find the job that you want. But that happens regularly. So you have to be backup plan. In my case, I could stay at home and write for a month and I'm happy. It's right. It's kind of a break. So it's okay. But again, you make sure the mortgage money is there.
Let's say the specificity of the position isn't suited to you, meaning like they're looking for an ophthalmologist who does general ophthalmology, but you've been doing cornea for the last 10 years. Or like you focus mostly on epilepsy, but they're looking for a general neurologist. So you're going to end up seeing things that you haven't seen in a while. And for the surgical specialist, you might be seeing surgical things that you haven't performed since residency. How do you navigate this? Because there are some people out there that are so specialized that they just might not have the opportunity, but only for a few positions.
No, you're absolutely right. And the people that are recruiting you for locums are not physicians. They're basically, they're like real estate agents. They're matchmakers, and they don't really have a great grasp of what you do. And one of the things that happens with locums, when you go, they don't advertise this, but the reason they need you is because they really need you. And that's either because somebody left, or they're growing really fast, or it's a toxic place to work and nobody stays.
How do you find that out? Actually, before I forget to ask you, how do you find that out?
Well, if you can, you get, you ask your agency, if you're working with an agency, to, get you the name of the last doctor that worked there and chat. And I always recommend that. It's not always possible. But I always assume that I'm going into a toxic environment as a locums. That's kind of the plan. And if it's not, that's great. But it's going to be, but you don't care, because all you have to do is show up and see the patients and go home. Yeah. You're on no committees, you just kind of let it, you got to have, what is that about the duck and the water down its back?
Yeah, let it roll off your back. Yeah.
Yes, you just do your medical job. Patients are patients. And if they don't have the equipment you need, so I'm sorry, sir, come back when they get it fixed, and you do your best in that scenario. So you have to have, the sort of the mantra of why people do locums regarding the schedule that we're just talking about is flexibility. You work when you want to work. But also locums physicians have to be flexible. because you're going to be in an environment that's going to require you to adapt to new people, a new facility. And the other thing is you may be by yourself. I mean, I've been to places I'm the only neurologist. So you have to assume there's no backup. So if you're a cornea guy and you don't really know how to do this other stuff, don't go. I mean, you have to kind of do some self-examination and say, can I really do this job? Is this something I can do? Now there may well be a cornea, the cornea guy may have had a heart attack, in the Bronx and they need somebody tomorrow. So it could happen. But, the more super specialized you are, I would say the harder it's going to be. If you're a pulmonologist, you can work in any ICU, that's great. But if all you've been doing is outpatient work, for the last 30 years, I wouldn't, jump into the COVID unit. So, yeah, you're the one that has to sort of decide.
You'll end up trying to put your patients on halothane to try and sedate them.
So, yeah, you have to be, it's not for somebody who is not flexible and not self-confident because they expect you to, to take off from day one.
Yeah.
And also ask what the EMR is that they use. And if you don't know how to use it, you tell them, I am not starting on day one. I need 2 days for somebody to teach me the EMR and you're going to pay me. And they will. Don't just show up.
Yeah, you've got leverage there. Use it. So that's really good. That's really good advice. Has telemedicine, or the wider acceptance of telemedicine since the pandemic, changed the locums landscape at all?
I think it's helped out the hospitals, that small hospitals, for example, that don't have a neurologist. They don't know what to do. And now if they have telemedicine, they can kind of fake it. They can say they have neurology coverage. So I think in some cases, it's probably diminished the need. But if you talk to any staffing agency, the need is like way up there. I get 3 calls a day, literally, from staffing agencies that need to place me somewhere.
Have you had any wild locums experiences? Like any stories worth telling that won't threaten the privacy of the patients you treated?
No, when you work as a locums, it's just like, any other hospital. You're just, doing your job. And I think one of the experiences I had, though, that was kind of interesting is I hadn't worked for a while and I got a job as a locums directly. There was a buddy, a friend of mine, a colleague. We were both giving a lecture, at some national meeting. We were sitting next to each other waiting for the last lecture, to get done. He said, Andy, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'll do this and that. He said, could you come and help us out? We're short, because he knew I was kind of doing this sort of thing. So I said, sure. And so I went there and I hadn't worked for a while. So I really went with a positive attitude, like this was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, that I got this locums position. So I showed up with a smile on my face. I was nice to everybody. I was exhausted at the end of the day just from, being nice to everybody all day. But at the end of this thing, they gave me a card. Oh, Dr. Wilner, thank you so much for your enthusiasm. And, I got like a little thank you note. People really appreciated that. So it was kind of a nice thing to learn that, you are bringing a lot of energy to the place that needs you. As a locums physician, and a lot of locums physicians will tell you this, they enjoy being appreciated because they didn't have anybody.
Because you're actually needed. You're not one of 11 otolaryngologists in your department. You are the only otolaryngologist in your department. And oh, thank goodness you're here. Yeah, you're getting that.
And the other doctors, rather than seeing you as competition, I had joined actually several other guys in their group, it's like, oh, great, one more guy to take call, read the EEGs, who's not a threat because they know you're leaving. So, the other guys and the staff all welcome you, and all you have to do is show up, do your work, write your note, go home. You don't have to worry about the new this and the new that and the recruitment, and they're going to change this. And, all the things that I do now as a division director responsibilities, you don't have those. No, and also nobody's interested in what you have to say because you're temporary. You're going to go.
Like the substitute teacher, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, who cares what you think? So there's a lot of freedom to just do your job. And a lot of locums doctors will tell you that. I just love practicing medicine, and all the other stuff kind goes away. And, if you work with an agency or, most places now, you just get a direct deposit in your, paycheck.
I did an ad a little while ago for a locums agency, and I'm not gonna give them the free press, but hey, if they want to sponsor the podcast again, absolutely. And one of the things that I said when I was formulating the monologue or whatever was that hedonic adaptation, right? Like we get used to everything, and you get used to every job. But with locums, since you're hopping from different people, different EMRs, different locations, everything is new every time you start it. And so you don't have that hedonic adaptation to the job because time slows down when this happens because you have to pay attention. It's not like when you're driving to work on the same route over and you arrive at work and you're like, man, I don't remember even driving. I just arrived here, right? You just shut off your brain. Well, the opposite is happening when you're in a new place with new people in a new EMR and it slows down time, which you have a kid. It goes so fast. Well, then how do we slow down? Well, this is a way to do it and maybe, enjoy things a little more. I mean, clearly you're a big fan of it here, but I think the hedonic adaptation or the lack thereof, because you're putting yourself in new places and new positions each time, helps you to keep that freshness to medicine. And at the same time, the last time you had to do that, you were either a medical student or a resident, and those each have their terrible for their own reasons when you enter a new place. But now you're the attending. And so it's a very different phenomenon.
Yes. I'll tell you one story. I was working at an academic institution. It was my first day. So I show up and there was some confusion, meet me at the blue door. I don't know the place. It's a giant hospital with 17, entries. And I could not find the lady. So I finally found her like 8:30 instead of 8. And then she takes me around to get my badge, and fill out forms. And in the meantime, I'm thinking I have to make rounds, right? And the day is just going on and on. And finally, it's like noon. And I said, I got to get going here. There's patients there, right? And so they finally bring me up to the ward. I think I'm going to be here till midnight, seeing all the patients. I'm used to doing everything myself. And then I found out I had a team. And they had seen everybody already. And all I had to do was co-sign their notes. It's like, this is great.
Oh, it was like advanced practice providers?
No, they were residents.
Oh.
I didn't know I had any residents. And it turns out I had like a half a dozen residents. They were looking for things to do. Everything was done. It's like, well, we can just chat about the patients.
Yeah. Oh, this is awesome. We can just talk and learn and teach. It's great.
I was like, whoa, what a shock. Because my previous job, it was a 300-bed hospital. I was the neurohospitalist. I actually started the program. I did every other week, and I had no nurse practitioner, no student, no helper. There was no EMR. I had to run around to the bed to find the vital signs, write my note. I got home at 10 o'clock every night and, fielded calls. They did have telestroke, actually, so that helped a little bit. But it was a nightmare. So that's what I thought this was going to be. And then it turned out I had this, I had 2 medical students and 2 residents and a senior resident.
How did you not know that beforehand?
Because they don't tell you.
That's so weird. That would be like the first line if you're trying to sell something. It's like leather bucket seats.
Right. It was definitely leather. I went back there again. 2 years later, they called me. Oh, yeah. So it's an interesting story. So while I was there, I thought, I would take this job as a permanent job. This is okay. So I said that to them because I was locums. They're obviously recruiting. And it went back and forth. And then it turned out that the university, some bigwig, had already had somebody in their sights. They said, Dr. Wilner, we pretty much, but you could have an outpatient job. I said, no, I don't want the outpatient job. I want the neurohospitalist job. He said, well, sorry. 2 years later, they called me, Dr. Wilner, would you mind coming back and doing the neurohospitalist job? I said, what happened? He said, the guy that they hired instead of me didn't work out. So now they needed me again. It's like, I didn't say it, but if you had hired me, you wouldn't have had to go through. I mean, it cost them a fortune, right? To bring the guy on board and everything. And then he goes. So I had fun the second time too.
Speaking of the onboarding, that's one more thing I want to touch upon before we close. And that is when I joined my practice, I joined, I signed everything before I even finished residency. I interviewed, and I knew this is where I was going. I'm still in the same practice. And they were like, fill out all these forms. And I'm like, no, I'm a resident. I'm going to wait until I'm done, and then I'm going to fill out all these forms. They're like, you got to fill out the... No, I'm going to wait. I didn't say no. I just like dragged my feet. I was busy. And then suddenly I was going to be not busy, So I was going to have plenty of time on my hands. And then I took months to get credentialed, months to get on the insurance plans, months and months. So much so that I was in the office twiddling my thumbs because I couldn't see patients because I was on so few plans. So how are the locums companies able to expedite that? Able to make that, like, getting your state license is so challenged.
Oh, yeah. That is actually a great question. And I think the way they do it, you do have to get credentialed first of all, you need a license in that
you need a
state.
state license.
And some states have a fast track to get a locums license. And then there's the new, interstate compact thing that speeds things up a little. But you must have a license in that state. And if it's a hospital, you have to be credentialed at that hospital. And I actually was ready to start September 1, and the hospital that I was going to work at could not get me credentialed in time because they were so slow, and I didn't get to start till October 1, even though they had no one. I mean, they couldn't get out of their own way to do their own credentialing. So you do have to be credentialed by the hospital, and then you have to be credentialed by the various insurance companies.
Yeah.
So I think there's a code that what they do is they assign, kind of like an NP, where they assign you as a locums to somebody who's already there.
Got it. They're your supervisor or something.
I think they bill through that, and I think they can do that for a certain amount of time. I'm not certain, but I think that's what they do. Because otherwise, you're right, it takes months and months to go through all of this credentialing. You can't just get started because that has never been a delay. In other words, we've been delayed for the state license, we've been delayed for hospital credit, but I've never been delayed for all the insurance companies. So I think that's the answer there.
So for those who want to take a deeper dive, you have a book, a whole book on locums. So tell us about the book.
I have a whole book. I don't know if you could see it there.
Well, this is primarily a podcast, so I'll read it. It says The Locum Life, The Physician's Guide, appropriately, to Locum Tenens.
Yeah, so I don't know. It dawned on me one day that when you talk about locums, it's kind of a little mysterious. And I've been doing it for years and years and years. And I've thought through all of these kind of questions. What about malpractice? What about travel expenses? What about 401k, licensing, credentialing? And I also put in the book, I interviewed 15 other locums doctors. What was your experience, your best experience? Would you advise a young graduate to do it? Some said, yes, it's a great way to test the water. Some said, no, they're not experienced enough to be out on their own. So, there are different views besides mine. But if you are interested in locums, I would, with all modesty, I would highly recommend reading the book first. I also have a website, andrewwilner.com, and you can contact me, and I'm happy to talk to you for 15 minutes for free to help out. I do this every now and then. People call me, I have this locums question. I'm thinking of doing this, but I really need somebody to talk to. Happy to schedule a call, talk to you. It doesn't cost anything. It's always interesting for me. I help patients all day. It's nice to help other doctors. So, and there's some resources on my site also. But I think it's an option that you need to know about. If you're between jobs or, you've had enough. But I'll throw in one more thing that I think locums is something that every physician should consider who is planning on leaving clinical medicine for a non-clinical job because they're burnt out. So don't become, an insurance reviewer before considering locums if your passion is really clinical medicine. It is another way to enjoy and profit from clinical medicine without going to the dark side.
Well, there's one more thing you need to plug, your podcast. As we were talking about before the show, the Venn diagram of topics we cover on our podcasts are almost completely, if not completely overlapping. If you like this podcast, you're going to like Dr. Wilner's podcast, Andrew Wilner's podcast. So what is it and where can we find you?
So it's called The Art of Medicine with Dr. Andrew Wilner, and that's pretty easy to find. It's The Art of Medicine with Dr. Andrew Wilner in your podcast. It's on all the podcast players. It's also on YouTube. And, it looks, talking heads. but sometimes we have stuff to show. And I interview people. I interview a lot of physicians who've written books, either novels or nonfiction books. I've interviewed 2 women who've written memoirs about their clinical experiences, and their lives and work-life balance. I've interviewed rabbis who take care of people who are dying. I try and interview people that a lot of other people, except maybe Brad, don't interview, but who have really important and interesting stories to tell.
So you're not getting people from like the publicists who are emailing you, trying to get their people on your show who have been to every podcast that's similar to ours.
If they have a book, I'll read the book. And if it's a good book, I'll have them on. It is a way to learn about, people I wouldn't know about. Some nonprofits also will contact me. They want me to, it's hangnail week or something. And, they've got some product for hangnail. So they, and sometimes it's very, I want to be a helper, and it's hard
always be giving. Yeah.
Hard to overcome the noise, right? I mean, there's so many people out there and podcasts, and you're right. You get these emails. The ones, there's a few I delete before I finish reading, right? That's not uncommon, but some of them are quite interesting.
Yeah. Actually, some of my favorites myself have been from those solicitations. So I shouldn't be so reflexive to turn it away. Well, this has been great. Dr. Andrew Wilner, thank you so much for teaching us all about locums, and looking forward to listening more on your podcast.
Right. And I think I'm going to have a very interesting guest, Dr. Bradley Block.
I'll be on soon.
Coming up soon.
Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee, and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thanks again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.